the signal that calls your name. Emma had always loved the quiet of her new suburban home, nestled between tall oaks and whispering pines. But the stillness was deceptive. On her third night, as she settled under the heavy blanket, the shrill ring of the old landline shattered the silence. Hesitant, she picked up the receiver, only to hear a faint, crackling whisper that barely uttered her name before the line went dead. The sound was so soft, so distorted, it felt less like a call and more like a thread tugging at the edges of her mind. At first, Emma convinced herself that the calls were a prank or a technical glitch. But when the whispers grew clearer, more insistent, she began to feel a chill that no thermostat could explain. Each night, the voice seemed to no more calling her by first name than by her childhood nickname, slipping in fragments of memories she never shared. The line would crackle with static, weaving in and out of silence, as if something was trying to reach her from beyond the veil of ordinary sound. Days blurred as Emma's world shrank to the confines of her home and the persistent signal that called her name. Friends, messages went unanswered. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to flicker, as if struggling to hold form. At night, her dreams were invaded by the same whispering voice, now joined by shapes she could not quite see, figures standing just beyond her gaze, watching silently. She felt their presence everywhere, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the rustle of leaves outside, in the hollow spaces of her own breath. One evening, driven by a mix of dread and determination, Emma traced the call's origin. The number led to an abandoned house at the outskirts of town, a place whispered about but never visited. The closer she got, the heavier the air grew, thick with silence and secrets. The house stood like a dark wound against the twilight, windows staring blankly like empty eyes. Emma's phone vibrated in her hand, an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered, heart pounding, and the voice whispered once again, "Emma, I'm waiting." Inside, the house breathed with the echoes of forgotten moments. Walls seemed to pulse with unseen life, and the faint hum of static filled every corner. Emma's footsteps faltered as the whispers swelled, no longer distant, but surrounding her. She reached a dusty room where an old rotary phone sat on a cracked table, ringing silently in the air. Picking up the receiver, she heard not her name, but a chorus of voices, familiar, distant, and impossibly close. The signal was no longer just a call. It was a summons, a binding thread she could not unravel. Emma left the house trembling, the voices fading but never quite gone. Back in her home, the phone remained silent, at least for now. But the feeling lingered. The signal still called, waiting in the spaces between moments, in the hush after a sigh, in the quiet corners of her mind. And sometimes, when the night was thick and the world seemed still, she could swear she heard her name whispered softly, carried on the wind, reminding her that some calls are never truly ended. The window that waits in silence. Emma had never believed in the stories whispered about the old farmhouse on the hill, but when she first arrived, the silence inside felt almost too complete, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The attic was her favorite refuge, a quiet space cluttered with forgotten memories, and dust-laden furniture. Yet, it was the window at the far end that caught her attention. Unlike any window she had seen, it never reflected the garden outside or the shifting clouds above. Instead, it seemed to stare back at her, opaque and still, like a dark portal waiting for something. At first, Emma told herself it was just the grime on the glass or the strange angle of the sun. But night after night, the window revealed subtle changes. Shadows twisted into figures that seemed to move just beyond clear sight, a fleeting silhouette here, a glimmer of light there. Sometimes, it appeared as though the window held scenes from a different time. A garden in bloom, children playing, a woman standing with her back turned. She tried to rationalize it, attributing the visions to exhaustion or imagination. But the unease grew steadily, settling deep within her bones. Emma's dreams began to merge with the images in the window. She found herself waking in cold sweats, haunted by whispers she couldn't understand. During the day, the silence of the house pressed down on her, making every creak and sigh feel amplified, as if the house were alive and watching. She started avoiding the attic, but the window's pull was magnetic, drawing her back with an irresistible force. One evening, as fog rolled thick across the fields, the window's glass rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a single finger. And for a moment, she thought she saw her own reflection, but with eyes that weren't hers. The following days blurred into a strange limbo. Emma's friends called, worried about her silence, but she couldn't bring herself to explain what was happening. She scribbled notes, trying to capture the fleeting images and sensations, but the more she focused on the window, the more the boundary between reality and something else seemed to weaken. One afternoon, as a sudden chill filled the room, the window's surface darkened completely, swallowing the light. Emma reached out, and the glass felt unnervingly warm like skin. She pulled her hand back, heart pounding, but the window remained still, waiting in silence. On the last night before she planned to leave, Emma sat near the window, refusing to let the silence win. As the clock struck midnight, the glass slowly cleared, revealing not the garden, but a room dimly lit and furnished differently, as if the window looked into another place or another time. A figure stood inside, motionless, watching her with an intensity that froze her blood. She blinked, and the scene vanished, replaced again by her attic. Emma realized then that the window wasn't just waiting, it was inviting her to step through, into a silence that might never let her go. Emma never returned to the farmhouse. Her belongings were found neatly packed, but the attic window remained untouched and silent. Neighbors say sometimes, on foggy nights, a faint glow can be seen behind the glass, and the outline of a woman staring out, waiting for something or someone to come back. The window waits in silence, and sometimes, in the quietest moments, you might hear it whispering your name. The whispers that shouldn't exist. Mara had always found comfort in the quiet corners of the town library, where dusty books offered worlds untouched by time. But lately, her attention had shifted to the neighboring house, a crumbling relic long abandoned and whispered about in hushed tones by the townsfolk. One evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, a faint sound caught her ear. It wasn't the creak of old wood or the rustle of leaves. It was something else, almost like whispers, soft and fragmented, leaking through the cracked plaster of the house's walls. Drawn by an uneasy curiosity, Mara stood frozen, listening as the whispers twisted and turned, teasing her with indistinct words she couldn't quite grasp. That night, sleep eluded Mara. The whispers echoed in her mind, half-remembered phrases that felt both alien and intimate. She returned next day, notebook in hand, determined to record whatever she could hear. As she approached the house, the air grew heavier, thick with an unspoken tension. The whispers were clearer now, weaving through the silence like fragile threads. Disjointed names, fleeting warnings, a tremor of sorrow. Yet, when she pressed her ear to the cold wall, the words slipped away, leaving only a hollow void. The line between reality and imagination blurred, and Mara began to question if the house was speaking to her, or if something inside her was listening too closely. Days passed, and the whispers turned into a haunting melody that seemed to follow Mara everywhere. She noticed shadows flickering where none should be, and the once familiar streets took on a strangely distorted hue. At the library, books she'd never seen before appeared on the shelves, old journals, diaries filled with cryptic entries, as if the house was reaching out, connecting her to forgotten stories. One entry spoke of a family lost to silence, their voices trapped within the walls, begging for release. Mara's heart pounded as she realized that the whispers might not be echoes of the past, but warnings tethered to something still lingering, watching, waiting. One evening, driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Mara returned to the house with a small recorder. The whispers welcomed her like old friends, coaxing her closer to a forgotten basement door hidden beneath tangled vines. The air grew colder, and a thick silence swallowed the world outside. As she descended the creaking stairs, the whispers morphed into a chorus, a dissonant symphony of lost voices, pleading and accusing, their tone both sorrowful and desperate. Mara's pulse raced, the air seemed alive, pressing against her skin. Suddenly, the voices fell silent, leaving only a suffocating stillness that threatened to consume her very thoughts. She fled the house trembling, the recorder clutched tight. Back in the safety of her apartment, Mara played the recording. At first, there was only static, but then faint whispers emerged, but not just from the house. They spoke her name, softly, intimately, as if the voices had followed her home. The words were indecipherable, yet laden with a weight that chilled her to the core. Mara realized the whispers weren't bound by walls or time. They had become a part of her own mind. The line between the haunted and the haunter blurred, and she knew some voices, once heard, could never be silenced. Days later, Mara returned to the library, hoping to find answers in the forgotten archives. Among the brittle pages, she discovered a faded photograph of the family rumored to have vanished in the house decades ago. Their eyes seemed to follow her, filled with warning and sorrow. The whispers had shifted, no longer distant murmurs, but a persistent echo in her thoughts. The question lingered: were these voices a curse, a call for help, or a trap woven by the shadows of the house? Mara chose silence, knowing some mysteries are safer left unsolved. Yet, as she closed the book, a whisper brushed her ear, a soft reminder that some walls hold secrets that never rest. The reflection that waits in silence. Lena had always been drawn to quiet places, and when she found the old apartment on the edge of town, its silence felt like a balm. The building creaked gently with the wind, and the faint scent of aged wood filled the air. But it was the tall, antique mirror resting against the far wall that caught her attention, its glass surprisingly clear despite years of neglect. At first, she admired her reflection as any newcomer might, unaware that something was already watching her back, waiting silently. Days passed, and Alina noticed small oddities. Her reflection lagged a moment behind her movements, or sometimes it didn't mimic a gesture at all. One evening, as she brushed her hair, the image in the mirror paused, watching her with an unsettling stillness before slowly smiling, a smile she didn't make. Heart pounding, she stepped closer, but the reflection was perfectly still again, matching her every move flawlessly. Doubt crept in. Was it fatigue or something else? Lena's nights grew restless. She swore she heard soft whispers coming from the mirror, faint murmurs just beyond comprehension. When she reached out to touch the glass, a cold chill ran through her fingers, as if the mirror itself was breathing. The silence of her apartment transformed into a heavy weight, pressing on her chest. She found herself avoiding the mirror, but it was impossible to ignore. It gleamed from the corner of every room, a silent sentinel. One morning, Alina awoke to find the mirror's surface fogged, though the room was cool and dry. Words appeared slowly, written in the condensation. "I see you." Panic welled inside her, but when she wiped the glass, the message vanished. Seeking answers, she scoured the apartment's history, uncovering tales of a previous tenant who vanished mysteriously, last seen staring into that very mirror. The line between her reality and the mirror's silent world blurred irreversibly. Days later, Alina caught her reflection moving independently once again, this time beckoning her closer with a slow, deliberate finger. She resisted, but the urge to understand was overwhelming. Leaning in, her breath fogged the glass, and behind the surface, the shadowy figure smiled fully for the first time, revealing a face that was both her own and not. The mirror didn't just reflect, it held a presence waiting to cross over, waiting for her to answer its silent call. The following morning, the apartment was empty. Alina's belongings remained, neatly arranged as if waiting for her return, but she was gone. The mirror stood still, its surface flawless and unyielding. Passers-by would sometimes catch a glimpse of a figure inside it, watching silently, waiting. The reflection that waits in silence had claimed another soul, leaving only the whispering question: who truly watches whom when the glass turns still? The fog that whispers at night. Emily arrived in Greystone on a chilly autumn evening, the kind where the air feels almost alive with secrets. The town was cloaked in an unusual fog, thick and persistent, curling around lampposts and creeping along the cracked sidewalks. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the nightly mist, warning her to stay indoors when it came. But Emily, eager for a fresh start, found herself drawn outside. As the fog swallowed the streetlights, a faint murmur brushed her ears, soft, like voices just beyond understanding, teasing her curiosity and unease. That night, the whispers grew clearer, weaving around Emily's bedroom like tendrils. She lay awake, heart pounding, straining to catch the words just out of reach. The voices weren't loud or threatening. Instead, they held a strange, hypnotic quality, a delicate thread linking her to something unseen. She told herself it was nothing, just the wind playing tricks. But deep down, she sensed the fog was trying to tell her something, a message buried in its swirling depths that she was meant to unravel. Days passed, and Emily's connection to the fog intensified. The whispers followed her everywhere, through the grocery store aisles, the empty park benches, even the quiet corners of the local library. Strangers' glances felt sharper, as if they sensed the change in her. She began to question her own mind. Was the fog truly speaking? Or was she losing herself to loneliness and fear? Sometimes, when the mist thickened, she glimpsed fleeting figures just beyond her sight, shadowy shapes that dissolved whenever she turned to look. One evening, the whispers shifted, becoming urgent and insistent. Emily found herself drawn to the old Greystone Cemetery, where the fog clung thickest between the crooked tombstones. There, she heard her name whispered clearly for the first time, echoing softly yet unmistakably. The voices seemed to beckon her deeper into the mist, promising answers, yet warning of danger. Her breath caught as she stepped forward, the boundary between the living and the forgotten blurring under the pale moonlight. At the heart of the cemetery, Emily discovered a cracked gravestone etched with a name she recognized, a name her grandmother had whispered about long ago, a secret family history entwined with the town's darkest past. The fog seemed to pulse around her, the whispers now a chorus of fragmented memories and half-forgotten truths. As the night deepened, Emily felt herself slipping between time's fragile threads, caught in a realm where past regrets and present fears merged, leaving her questioning if the fog was a curse, a guardian, or something far more elusive. As dawn threatened the horizon, the fog began to recede, the whispers fading into silence. Emily stood alone, the first light revealing the cemetery's quiet stillness. Yet, in her pocket, she found a small, cold token, a relic from the mist, a reminder that some voices never truly leave. Back in her home, the fog outside thinned, but inside her mind, the whispers lingered, a haunting echo of the night's secrets. Emily realized that some mysteries in Greystone were meant not to be solved, but to be carried, whispered quietly in the fog, forever just beyond reach. The Forest of Dread. The first time I heard about the Forest of Dread was from an old man at a gas station miles from town. His voice lowered to a whisper as he warned me not to go there after dark. He said the forest wasn't just trees and shadows, it held something deeper, something that got inside your mind, Skeptical, but intrigued, my friends and I decided to explore it, thinking the stories were just local superstition. But as we crossed the threshold beneath the towering oaks, an inexplicable chill settled in, and the forest seemed to close around us, swallowing any glimpse of the outside world. First, the forest was almost peaceful, the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call breaking the silence. But as the sun dipped lower, the atmosphere warped. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward us. Strange sounds echoed whispers or wind. Every rustle made our hearts jump. One by one, subtle changes crept in. A path that led us back to where we started, a sudden drop in temperature, and fleeting shadows darting just beyond our vision. It was as if the forest was alive, watching, waiting. As night fully embraced the forest, the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. We found ourselves separated, each hearing different voices calling our names, memories twisted into chilling riddles. The darkness seemed to seep into our thoughts, turning doubts into fears. I caught glimpses of figures standing just beyond the trees, never fully visible, but always watching. Our group's laughter turned to silence, replaced by a creeping paranoia. We questioned each other. Did we hear the same things? Did the forest change its shape around us? The boundary between reality and nightmare thinned with every passing minute. In the heart of the forest, we stumbled upon an ancient clearing, ringed by stones worn by time. Here, the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against our minds. The clearing felt like a trap, a place where time folded in on itself. One friend swore she saw a reflection in a puddle that wasn't her own. Another felt hands graze her shoulder, though no one was near. Fear twisted into something darker, an overwhelming sense that leaving was impossible, that the forest had claimed us in a way no one could explain. We huddled together, not sure if we were waiting for rescue or something else entirely. When dawn finally broke, the forest seemed to release its hold, but nothing felt the same. Our memories were fragmented, like pieces missing from a puzzle. We found the path out, but the forest whispered still, its voice a haunting echo in our minds. Back in town, we tried to explain what happened, but the words felt hollow. The forest of dread had left its mark, not in wounds or scars, but in the way shadows lingered in our thoughts, and the unsettling feeling that some part of us never truly left. The unknown remained, an unspoken terror that would shadow us forever. The window that watches back. Emma had never believed in haunted houses, but as she unpacked the last box in her new home, her gaze kept returning to the old window facing the street. It was peculiar, not because of its age or the warped glass, but because it seemed to catch and hold the light differently, almost as if it was observing her rather than reflecting the world behind her. The evening settled in a thick silence, and though the neighborhood was peaceful, an inexplicable chill crept through the room. That night, Emma found herself drawn to the window again and again. Each time she looked, the reflection seemed subtly off. Sometimes, the street outside was empty, yet the window showed the shadow of a figure standing just beyond the frame. Other times, the reflection lingered on objects she hadn't moved, or caught glimpses of rooms behind her that didn't exist. She told herself it was her mind playing tricks, tiredness mixing with the unfamiliarity of the house. Days passed, and Emma's sleep grew restless. She'd wake to find the window's reflection shifted in ways impossible to explain. Once, she saw herself sitting on the couch, but the reflection was smiling back at her with a face that wasn't quite hers, too wide, too still. The feeling of being watched seeped into her thoughts, a slow, creeping paranoia that gnawed at her sense of reality. She stopped leaving the curtains open, afraid of what might watch through the glass when she wasn't looking. One evening, as the rain tapped softly against the window, Emma's reflection moved independently. She tried to look away, but the eyes in the glass held her gaze deep, dark, unblinking. A whisper seemed to float faintly, just beyond hearing, promising secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The window wasn't just a barrier or a mirror. It was a presence, watching patiently, waiting for her to acknowledge it fully. Emma reached out to touch the cold glass, and for a moment, she thought she saw her own fingers pressed against the other side, but reversed and separate from her own. The boundary blurred the watcher and the watched, intertwined in a silent, endless gaze. She blinked, and the reflection slipped back into normality, leaving her trembling and alone with the question: was the window showing her a truth, or was it crafting a nightmare only she could see? Days later, Emma found the courage to draw the curtains and seal the window from view. Yet, even with the glass hidden, the feeling of being watched clung to her. Late at night, when the house settled and shadows deepened, she swore she could hear soft tapping, like gentle knocks from the other side, reminding her that some windows do more than show us the world. Sometimes they watch back, waiting for the moment we look away. The caller without a face. Eva had never been particularly superstitious, but the minute she stepped into the apartment on Elm Street, a chill ran down her spine. It wasn't the creaky floorboards or the flickering lights that unsettled her. It was the old rotary phone mounted on the wall, its receiver slightly askew as if someone had just let go. The number was unlisted, and yet, after the first night, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, but strange, offering no name, no reason, only a haunting familiarity that made Eva's heart race. At first, Eva thought it was a prank. The voice never spoke directly, instead whispering vague, unsettling phrases like "you're not alone" or "I see what you hide." Each call came later at night, when the city outside was drowned in silence. The call stirred something deep within her, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a creeping doubt about her own sanity. Friends dismissed it as stress, but Eva could no longer ignore the sensation of eyes watching her, even when the line was dead. One night, the caller's tone shifted. The voice began recounting memories Eva never shared, childhood secrets, forgotten dreams, moments of vulnerability locked away in the recesses of her mind. It was as if the caller had peeled back the layers of her life, exposing raw nerves she thought were safely hidden. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Was this a ghost from the past, or something alive, watching, waiting? The fear gnawed at her, yet she found herself answering every call, desperate to understand. Eva began leaving the phone off the hook, trying to break the connection. But the calls came through anyway, static, breathing, then silence. The apartment seemed to close in around her, walls whispered, and shadows moved just out of sight. Paranoia crept in. Were the calls a warning or a threat? One night, the voice said simply, "Look outside." Heart pounding, Eva drew back the curtain. The street was empty, yet in the reflection of the window, a pale face stared back, featureless, blank, impossible to look away from. Days blurred into restless nights. Eva tried to escape the apartment, but no matter where she went, the phone line followed calls coming from nowhere. The faceless caller, always one step behind. Friends became distant voices, and reality splintered into fragments of fear and confusion. The final call came as a whisper. "You cannot hide from yourself." Eva realized then the caller was not a stranger, but the darkest parts of her own mind reaching out, a mirror reflecting everything she refused to face. The apartment stood silent once more, the phone resting quietly as if nothing had happened. Yet, sometimes, late at night, neighbors whisper of a woman staring into a window, her eyes empty and searching. And if you listen closely, the old rotary phone rings again, calling out to whoever dares answer. A voice waiting to uncover secrets better left buried. The caller without a face remains, a reminder that some fears wear no mask, and some calls never end. The voice from the past. Emma's first night in the cabin was marked by an unsettling silence. The forest, though alive with nocturnal sounds, seemed to hold its breath around her new refuge. As she settled into the creaky old bed, a faint whisper reached her ears, a soft, distant calling of her name. She froze, heart quickening, but when she called out, only the rustling leaves answered. The voice was not just a trick of the wind. It felt deliberate, personal, a thread tugging at something buried deep within her. Days passed, and the voice returned each night, growing clearer, more insistent. It wasn't just her name anymore, snippets of forgotten phrases, half-remembered stories from a past she never knew, whispered through the dark. Emma found herself drawn to the cabin's attic, where dusty trunks and faded photographs hinted at a family history shrouded in silence. Every creak and whisper seemed to beckon her deeper into the cabin's secrets, weaving a web of curiosity and dread. One evening, as a storm gathered outside, the voice spoke clearly for the first time, telling a story of loss and betrayal. Emma's fingers trembled as she traced the outline of a faded portrait, a woman whose eyes seemed to hold the same haunted sadness she now felt. The voice spoke of promises broken and a secret pact tied to the cabin's very foundation. Was this a plea for help or a warning? The line between memory and madness blurred as the restless past reached out to claim her. Emma's nights grew restless, haunted by half-formed dreams where the voice became a presence, a figure standing just beyond the edge of sight, always watching, waiting. In waking hours, she noticed small signs. Objects moved, faint footprints in the dust, a chill that never left the air. Her reflection in the cracked mirror seemed to flicker, as if another face hovered just behind hers. Paranoia crept in. but so did an unbearable pull to understand, to listen, to answer. One night, the voice whispered a final invitation to speak aloud the forgotten name that would unlock the truth. Emma hesitated, heart pounding as the air thickened around her. When she finally spoke, a silence deeper than nightfall enveloped the cabin. The answer never came in words, but in a sudden, overwhelming calm, as if the past and present had merged. Emma realized the voice was not a curse, but a bridge, a call to claim her place within the shadows that shaped her family's fate. When dawn broke, the cabin felt different, lighter, yet charged with unseen energy. Emma stepped outside into the soft morning light, the forest no longer silent, but alive with a subtle harmony. The voice had faded, but its presence lingered like a secret shared between old trees and new beginnings. Emma understood that some echoes from the past never truly disappear. They wait patiently for someone willing to listen and walk the thin line between worlds. The Watcher Without a Face. When Emma first arrived at the house on Maplewood Lane, she thought the silence was a welcome relief from the city's chaos. The neighborhood was sleepy, wrapped in the soft glow of street lamps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Yet, from the very first night, an inexplicable unease settled over her. It wasn't any particular sound or movement, but a subtle sensation, as if unseen eyes traced her every step within the walls. She dismissed it as fatigue, a trick of a new place settling into old bones. But the feeling lingered, stubborn and cold. Days passed, and Emma began to notice small oddities, objects slightly moved from where she left them. A faint breath of cold air in rooms sealed shut, and the unshakable feeling of being watched even in the brightest daylight. One afternoon, while unpacking, she glimpsed something in the hallway mirror, a figure standing behind her, featureless, as if its face had been erased. When she spun around, no one was there. Heart pounding, she tried convincing herself it was a trick of light or her imagination running wild in isolation. That night, the feeling grew stronger, almost suffocating. Emma lay awake, eyes fixed on the dark corners of her room, where shadows seemed to pulse and shift. She told herself repeatedly that there was no one there, yet the unmistakable sensation of a presence hovered inches from her skin. The silence pressed against her ears like a living thing. Then, from the edge of her vision, she caught a fleeting glimpse, a pale, featureless face, just beyond the doorway, watching patiently, waiting. As days slipped into restless nights, Emma's grip on certainty wavered. She began avoiding mirrors and windows, fearing to catch another glimpse of the Watcher. Friends called, but their voices felt distant, as if muffled by an invisible veil. She questioned her own sanity. Was this all a product of isolation, stress, or something far older and darker embedded within the house's walls? The faceless Watcher never spoke, never moved with haste, only observed with an endless, unsettling patience that gnawed at her mind. One evening, as a storm thrashed outside, Emma gathered the courage to confront the Watcher. She stepped into the hallway, voice trembling as she called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the rain's relentless drumming. Then, The air shifted. A cold, breathless emptiness filled the space where the watcher had seemed to linger. No answers came. No face appeared. Only the oppressive weight of not knowing and the lingering question: was the watcher a guardian, a specter, or the shadow of her own unraveling mind? Emma never fully left the house, nor did the watcher ever reveal itself. Sometimes, late at night, neighbors claim they see a figure standing motionless in the window, an empty face staring out, watching over the quiet street. Emma's story became a whispered legend, a haunting reminder that some presences are neither friend nor foe, but something in between, waiting patiently just beyond the edge of sight. And so, the watcher remains faceless, eternal, and impossible to forget. The basement that whispers at night. Emma had always loved old houses, their creaks and quirks whispering stories of the past. So when she found the century-old Victorian on the edge of town, she felt an odd comfort despite its faded charm. But the moment she stepped inside, a faint chill traced her spine. The basement door, tucked beneath the stairs, seemed darker than the rest of the house. At night, when silence settled, soft, indistinct whispers drifted upward, like secrets trying to escape the walls. Emma told herself it was just the wind or her imagination, yet the unease lingered. One evening, drawn by the persistent murmurs, Emma descended the creaky stairs armed with only a flashlight. The beam caught dust motes swirling in the stale air and the peeling paint on the walls. The whispers grew clearer, but remained just beyond comprehension, soft syllables fading into silence whenever she tried to listen closely. The basement itself was empty, save for a few forgotten boxes and an old, warped mirror leaning against the far wall. Yet the feeling of being watched prickled at her skin, as if unseen eyes waited just beyond the dim light. Days passed, and the whispers invaded more moments, sometimes when Emma was alone in the kitchen, other times while she tried to sleep. She began to dread the basement stairs, yet couldn't resist the urge to listen. She noticed something peculiar. The whispers always seemed to respond to her thoughts, shifting tone and cadence when she felt calm or frightened. It was as if the basement itself was alive, aware, and somehow connected to her. Sleep became uneasy, dreams tangled with muffled voices calling her name, urging her to return. One night, Emma found a small, worn journal tucked beneath loose floorboards in the basement. Its pages were filled with frantic scrawls, half-formed sentences about voices, shadows, and a presence trapped below. The writer spoke of trying to communicate, to warn, but never fully explained what lurked in the darkness. Emma's fingers trembled as she read the final words. They listen, they wait, and they whisper your name when you're alone. That chilling sentence echoed in her mind as the basement's stale air seemed to thicken, pressing in closer, suffocating yet strangely inviting. Haunted by the journal's warnings, Emma tried to avoid the basement, but the whispers only grew louder, more insistent. She began to question her own sanity. Was the house playing tricks, or was something truly reaching out from the shadows? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she gathered enough courage to speak aloud into the darkness. "What do you want from me?" Silence answered, then the faintest, almost tender whisper, "Remember." The word hung in the air, fragile and heavy, leaving Emma trembling with a mixture of fear and strange hope. In the following days, Emma's dreams shifted. Fragmented memories surfaced, flickers of a life she never lived, but somehow knew. Faces she couldn't place, voices calling her back, and a sense of unfinished business buried beneath the floorboards. Convinced the basement held answers, she returned one last time, flashlight steady. This time, the whispers formed words, guiding her to a hidden panel behind the mirror. Behind it, a dusty box contained old photographs and trinkets, remnants of a family lost to time and tragedy. Emma realized the whispers were not threats, but desperate pleas for remembrance. Emma placed the photographs on the basement floor, whispering the names she found etched on the back. The air shifted, no longer oppressive but peaceful, as if a long-held breath was finally released. The whispers faded into a gentle hum of gratitude, leaving behind a quiet stillness. Yet, as Emma ascended the stairs, the faintest whisper brushed her ear, "Remember." Not a warning this time, but a solemn promise. Emma knew the basement's secrets would linger, a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end, and that the past waits patiently beneath the surface, whispering to those willing to listen. The stranger that calls your name. Mara had always been a light sleeper, but the nights she began hearing it, the faintest whisper of her name, were different. At first, it felt like a trick of the wind, the apartment settling. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the soft call came again, barely louder than a breath, as if someone was just beyond the walls, trying not to be noticed. She told herself it was nothing, a product of loneliness and stress, yet the chill that ran down her spine told another story. The next evening, the whisper wasn't just a whisper anymore. It nearly sounded like someone standing right beside her, calling her name in a voice that was almost familiar, a voice that tugged at forgotten corners of her mind. Mara's heart pounded as she scanned the empty room. No one was there, yet the feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and suffocating. Was it a visitor she hadn't noticed? Or something else, something that belonged neither to night nor day? Days passed, and the calls grew more personal. The voice whispered secrets only Mara knew, things she'd never told a soul. Memories of moments she had long buried surfaced unbidden, as if the stranger was inside her mind, peeling back layers with cold fingers. Sleep became sparse and restless, the line between reality and nightmare blurring, until Mara questioned her own sanity. Who was this stranger, and what did it want from her? One night, compelled by dread and curiosity, Mara whispered back into the darkness, asking, "Who are you?" Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, just before dawn, the voice answered not with words, but a name she had never heard before, spoken softly, almost lovingly. The sound resonated deep inside her, stirring something ancient and unknowable. Mara's breath hitched, caught between fear and a strange, magnetic pull she couldn't resist. In the days that followed, Mara found subtle changes in her apartment, Small objects moved, faint footprints on the dusty floor, a chair slightly turned. The stranger was no longer just a voice, but a presence that seeped into her world, unseen yet undeniably there. No one else noticed. As Mara's isolation deepened, so did the stranger's influence, a quiet insistence that she was not alone and never would be again. One evening, Mara's phone rang an unknown number. Hands trembling, she answered. No voice, just the faintest whisper of her name, carried over the line like a breath. Suddenly, the line went dead, and the world felt colder, emptier. Mara realized then that the stranger was not just calling, it was waiting for her to answer, to step into a space where the boundary between the known and the unknown dissolves forever. And in that silence, Mara knew her life had already changed. Days later, friends asked if Mara was all right. She smiled, but something in her eyes was different, darker, distant. The whisper never stopped. It followed her everywhere, a constant murmur beneath the noise of daily life. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she saw a figure just beyond the corner of her eye, waiting patiently. And sometimes, when the wind was quiet, she swore she heard her name called softly, inviting her to listen forever. The light that watches back. When Clara first moved into her modest apartment on the edge of town, she barely noticed the small, antique wall light above the doorway. It was peculiar, an old brass fixture that seemed out of place amid the sparse modern furnishings. Yet, there was something comforting about its faint, amber glow, even when the switch was off. On her first night, as rain pattered softly against the window, Clara found herself staring at the light, a strange sensation creeping up her spine, as if the fixture was silently observing her. Days passed, and Clara noticed the light's glow shifting ever so slightly, sometimes warmer, sometimes cooler, as if responding to her mood. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of tired eyes. But the feeling of being watched, of an unseen presence tethered to the light, grew stronger. When she turned off the lamps at night, the faint glow never fully faded, lingering like a heartbeat in the shadows. The apartment, once a refuge, began to feel less like home and more like a stage where the light was the silent audience. One evening, during a power outage, Clara sat alone in near darkness, her only illumination the mysterious light. It pulsed gently, almost breathing. As she stared, the glow seemed to brighten when she looked away, dimming when she met its gaze. A chill settled in her chest. Was the light aware, watching? Her rational mind battled with creeping paranoia. Was the fixture just a relic, or something else entirely? That night, sleep evaded her, replaced by the unsettling sensation that the light was waiting for something. In the following days, Clara began finding subtle signs that the light was more than a mere object. Books she hadn't touched were slightly moved. Faint whispers brushed the edges of her hearing. The apartment's silence grew heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. Sometimes, in fleeting moments, she thought she glimpsed a shadow behind the light, a figure just beyond the corner of her eye. Yet, every time she turned, there was nothing. The ambiguity gnawed at her. Was she unraveling? Or was the light revealing its true nature? Determined to understand, Clara researched the apartment's history and discovered previous tenants had left abruptly, citing strange occurrences. No one mentioned the light explicitly, but the vague accounts hinted at something unseen. That night, she sat beneath the fixture, speaking aloud, asking what it wanted. The light flickered violently, then settled into a steady glow, warmer than before. For a fleeting moment, she felt a presence, neither hostile nor kind, but deeply ancient and watchful. The silence afterward was deafening. Days turned into restless nights as Clara's reality blurred. The light seemed to know her thoughts, shifting in brightness or warmth with her moods. She began talking to it, confessing fears and memories she'd never shared aloud. Sometimes the glow flickered as if acknowledging her words. Yet, the more she engaged, the more isolated she felt from the outside world. The light was both companion and captor, its quiet vigilance a constant reminder that she was never truly alone. One night, Clara awoke to the light shining brighter than ever, flooding the room with a golden glow that was almost too intense to bear. In that brilliance, she thought she saw a face, not her own, reflected faintly in the window glass, watching her with unreadable eyes. Heart pounding, she blinked, and it was gone. The light dimmed back to its usual quiet pulse. Whether it was a trick of the mind or something more, Clara could no longer deny the presence that watched from the light, a watcher who had waited patiently all along. Clara never turned the light off again. Instead, she learned to live with its gaze, a quiet companion in the shadows. The watcher was neither friend nor foe. It simply observed, patient and eternal. In the end, she understood that some darkness is not meant to be vanquished, but embraced. A silent presence that reminds us of the thin veil between the known and the unknowable, the light that watches back when we think we're alone. The window without a face. When Clara first moved into the creaking Victorian house on the edge of town, she was captivated by its forgotten charm. The air smelled faintly of aged wood and distant rain. But it was the attic that drew her most, an untouched space filled with relics of the past. And most curiously, a tall, narrow window set oddly into the far wall. At first, it seemed like any other window, but soon Clara noticed something strange. The glass appeared to show a faint outline of a face, though when she looked directly, no reflection met her eyes. Night after night, Clara returned to that window, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The face in the glass never became clearer. It remained an indistinct silhouette shifting just beyond her focus. Sometimes she swore it looked sad, other times desperate. Her dreams began to fill with whispers she couldn't quite understand, and a coldness settled into the room, as if the window breathed with a life of its own. One evening, Clara found herself speaking to the window, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" she asked, fingers lightly brushing the cold glass. The face seemed to flicker, a subtle change in shape that sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly, the room felt impossibly still. She stepped back, heart racing, as the reflection faded into nothing but a blurred, empty pain. Days passed, and Clara's obsession grew. She stopped answering calls and avoided friends, spending hours in the attic. Her journal filled with sketches of the faceless shape and fragmented notes about the whispers. Sometimes she caught herself staring at the window even in daylight, as though it might reveal a secret only she could see. Yet, the more she watched, the more the line between reality and illusion blurred, making her question whether the face was a part of the house or a part of her. One night, a soft tapping startled her from sleep. The attic was cold, the window glowing faintly in the moonlight. As Clara approached, the face in the glass became clearer, not a face at all, but a hollow void outlined by darkness, empty yet somehow watching her. She heard a whisper, not from outside, but inside her own mind. "Look closer." Trembling, she pressed her eye to the cold glass, and the world seemed to tilt. Behind the window was not the night outside, but a mirror image of the attic, empty, except for a shadow where she should be. Clara stumbled back, heart pounding. The silence that followed was thicker than before, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She realized then that the window was not just a window, it was a threshold, a watcher's eye, a trap. The face was hers and not hers, a reflection of something lost or left behind. And as she turned to flee, the faintest breath brushed her neck, a whisper echoing, "We are watching." In the days that followed, Clara left the house, but the window never left her mind. Friends said she seemed distant, haunted by something unseen. At night, she sometimes swore she could see a faint glow on the far wall of her new apartment, the same hollow face watching back through a window that should not exist. And somewhere, in the silence between thought and dream, the whisper remained, "Look closer." The path from the past. When Clara inherited her grandmother's estate, it was the quiet, untouched woods behind the house that drew her curiosity. Among the towering oaks and whispering pines, she found a narrow dirt path she had never noticed before. The air around it felt cooler, the usual sounds of birds and wind muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Something about that path seemed to beckon her, not with invitation, but with a silent urgency she couldn't explain. On the first day she walked the path, the forest seemed almost alive around her. The crunch of leaves beneath her feet sounded too loud, and the usual scents of pine and earth were replaced by an unfamiliar, faintly metallic tang. She swore she heard whispers, indistinct words carried on the wind, like fragments of conversations long forgotten. The path twisted deeper than she expected, leading her beneath arching limbs that formed natural tunnels, and shadows that seemed to flicker just beyond sight. By the second day, Clara noticed something unsettling. The path seemed to change. Where yesterday there had been fallen leaves, now the ground was bare soil, as if freshly disturbed. Occasionally, she glimpsed shapes in the distance, figures that vanished when she tried to look directly. The whispers grew clearer, almost like voices struggling to tell her something important, yet always slipping away before she could grasp their meaning. A gnawing sense of familiarity twisted inside her chest, though she couldn't place its source. That night, Clara dreamt of the house as it once was, bustling with life, laughter echoing through the halls, and a little girl running through the rooms. But the dream twisted, the laughter turned hollow, and the girl's eyes met hers with a silent plea. She woke with a start, the whispers from the forest echoing in her mind. Was it memory or something else? The line blurred as she realized the path was not just a trail through the woods, but a corridor through forgotten time, drawing her deeper into a story she had never known she was part of. The following day, Clara returned to the path with a small notebook, determined to piece together its secrets. She found strange carvings on tree bark, symbols she couldn't identify, but felt drawn to trace with her fingers. Suddenly, a figure appeared ahead, just out of clear focus, a woman in faded clothes, her face obscured. When Clara called out, the figure vanished like mist. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, and Clara's heart pounded as she realized the path wasn't just leading her forward. It was leading her back into a past that refused to stay buried. As days passed, Clara's visits to the path grew more frequent, each journey unraveling more fragments of the past, a family torn by loss, secrets whispered in twilight, and a tragedy that had shadowed the estate for decades. The whispers changed, sometimes pleading, sometimes warning. Clara felt herself slipping between two worlds, caught in the fragile space where history and memory overlap. And then, on a mist-choked morning, when the forest was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves, the path revealed its final secret, a reflection not in a mirror, but in the depths of her own soul. Clara never quite left the path behind. The estate remained, quiet yet alive with the unseen. Visitors would sometimes glimpse her silhouette walking among the trees, a figure half remembered like a fading dream. The path from the past became a boundary, a place where the living and the lost meet, not in violence or horror, but in the quiet, lingering presence of what once was and what might never be forgotten. And in that delicate balance, the true terror lies, not in what is seen, but in what remains just beyond the edge of knowing. The stranger that found me. It was just after sunset when I first noticed him, a silhouette standing motionless at the edge of the park across from my apartment. At first, I thought it was just someone waiting for the bus, but the figure didn't move, didn't shift, as the streetlights flickered on one by one. A quiet unease settled in my chest, a feeling I couldn't quite name. The park was nearly empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a cool breeze. I told myself I was just tired, imagining shadows where there were none. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I pulled the curtains closed, the faint outline of the stranger seemed to vanish, but the knot of anxiety only tightened. My phone buzzed a message from an unknown number simply reading, "I see you." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, wondering if someone was playing a cruel joke, or if something more sinister had slipped into my reality. The line between paranoia and truth blurred, and sleep became a distant memory. The following days were a series of subtle, inexplicable occurrences. The soft creak of floorboards when I was alone, the faintest whisper just beyond hearing, and a lingering coldness that no heater could chase away. At the grocery store, I caught glimpses of the stranger reflected in polished surfaces, a figure just at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I turned. Friends noticed my growing unease, but I couldn't explain the creeping dread that had taken root inside me. One evening, as rain began to fall, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph of me, taken from a distance, standing outside my own apartment. No note, no signature, just the haunting proof that I was being watched. My breath caught in my throat, and every instinct screamed to flee. But where could I go when the eyes were everywhere? The city suddenly felt like a labyrinth of unseen eyes and silent footsteps. That night, I left every light on and sat by the window, watching the street below. The stranger appeared again, stepping out from the shadows with deliberate calm. But this time, something was different. Their face was still hidden, yet the air between us thickened with a strange familiarity. As I stared, frozen, the figure slowly raised a hand in a silent wave before melting back into the darkness. I realized then that fear wasn't just about what we see, but what we imagine in the spaces between. In the days that followed, the stranger's visits became less frequent, their presence a shadowy echo rather than a looming threat. Yet, I found myself forever changed, eyes scanning every corner, heart quickening at the faintest noise. The stranger that found me wasn't just a man in the dark, but a reflection of the fragile line between solitude and fear. And sometimes, I wonder if they are still out there, waiting, not to harm, but to remind me that some mysteries are better left unanswered. The path that watches back. When Lena first saw the path behind her new countryside home, it was barely noticeable, just a thin line of dirt winding between ancient oaks and thick undergrowth. The locals rarely spoke of it, and when they did, their voices dropped to whispers. Despite warnings, she felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if the path itself was inviting her to follow. On her first walk, the air grew cooler, the forest quieter, and shadows lengthened unnaturally, making her skin prickle with anticipation and unease. Each day, Lena returned, the path seeming to shift beneath her feet, subtly changing length or curvature, as though it lived and breathed. She began noticing strange things, distant whispers just beyond comprehension, fleeting shapes flickering between the trees, and the sensation of being watched. Her reflection in a nearby creek once showed a flicker of something behind her, though when she turned, nothing was there. The familiar became unfamiliar, and her curiosity grew alongside a creeping dread. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena heard a soft voice whisper her name, carried on a breeze that didn't seem to move the leaves. She froze, heart pounding, trying to dismiss it as imagination. Yet the voice grew clearer, insistent, beckoning her onward. The path ahead was cloaked in an unnatural twilight, the trees seeming to lean closer, their branches like grasping fingers. She felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from the darkness, testing her resolve. Lena's nights became restless. Dreams of the path twisted into nightmares, faces emerging from the bark, eyes blinking open where none should be. and footsteps that echoed hers, but never matched her pace. During the day, the forest seemed to watch silently, shadows lengthening just out of focus. Her friends noticed her growing withdrawal, her distracted gaze fixed on some invisible presence. Yet she couldn't stop returning, drawn by a need she didn't understand, as if the path was not just watching, but waiting. One morning, Lena found a small object on the path, a smooth, dark stone etched with unfamiliar symbols glowing faintly in the dawn light. She picked it up, and a sudden wave of vertigo swept over her. The forest around her seemed to pulse, alive with silent breath. The path stretched farther than before, disappearing into a deepening mist. For a moment, she glimpsed a figure standing at the far end, indistinct, watching. Then it vanished. Was it real, or a trick of her unraveling mind? The path held its secrets close, offering no answers, only the lingering sense that it knew her far better than she knew herself. Lena stopped telling herself it was just the forest playing tricks. The path wasn't merely a trail, it was something else, an entity that shifted, watched, and perhaps waited. Each return felt like stepping into a gaze that pierced her soul, unraveling the boundary between observer and observed. Was the path alive, or was she becoming part of something older, something hidden beneath the soil and roots? The question lingered like the fading echoes of footsteps behind her, unanswered, as shadows lengthened one last time beneath the watchful trees. The whispers from the past. Emma never believed in ghosts, but when she inherited the old cottage from a distant relative, she hoped the quiet countryside would help her escape the noise of the city and her own restless thoughts. The cottage was charming in a way that felt frozen in time, worn wooden floors, faded floral wallpaper curling at the edges, and a fireplace that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. On her first night, as the wind whispered through cracked window panes, she thought she heard faint murmurs, like voices just beyond comprehension. She shook her head, blaming the unfamiliar creaks and sighs for her unsettled nerves. Days passed, and the whispers grew more persistent. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, drawing Emma's attention to places where the wallpaper was worst damaged. Sometimes the voices felt close, almost pleading. Other times, they melted into the silence. Intrigued and unnerved, Emma began peeling back the layers of wallpaper, uncovering faded, cryptic messages scrawled beneath names, dates, and fragments of sentences that spoke of loss, regret, and warnings. The cottage wasn't just old, it was holding onto memories, refusing to let them fade. One evening, as twilight seeped through the cracked windows, Emma discovered a hidden compartment behind the fireplace bricks. Inside lay a small, dusty journal bound in cracked leather. Its pages were filled with the handwriting of a woman who once lived here, her thoughts, fears, and a chilling account of hearing whispers that no one else could. The journal spoke of a presence tied to the house, something that existed between reality and memory, feeding on loneliness and silence. The final entry was abruptly cut off, smeared as if hurried or interrupted. That night, the whispers returned louder, almost urgent. Emma felt an invisible weight pressing against her chest, a cold presence lingering just beyond the edge of sight. She tried to rationalize wind, her imagination, exhaustion, but the air grew thick with something unspoken. The cottage seemed to breathe around her, the walls pulsing with a heartbeat she couldn't hear but could feel. In a moment of desperate clarity, Emma spoke aloud, asking what the house wanted. The response was a breathless silence, followed by a faint, sorrowful whisper, "Remember." Driven by that single word, Emma combed through every corner of the cottage, piecing together fragments from the journal, the hidden messages, and the faded photographs tucked away in drawers. Each discovery painted a portrait of a woman trapped in time, her story tangled with the house, and a loss so profound it transcended death. Emma felt a strange kinship, as if the whispers were not threats, but calls for understanding, for remembrance. Yet as dawn broke, the cottage fell silent once more, leaving her with a lingering question. Was she the visitor? Or had she become part of the house's endless story? The shadows that whisper at night. Liza had never believed in the supernatural, but the moment she stepped into the cramped apartment on Maple Street, something felt off. The air was thick, heavy like it remembered years of silence and secrets. The peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards whispered stories she couldn't yet hear. That first night, as she lay in bed, the house seemed to breathe around her, and in the quiet, faint murmurs began to stir from the shadows, soft, almost imperceptible whispers that made her heart quicken. At first, Eliza told herself it was the wind, or maybe the building settling after years of neglect. But the whispers grew clearer, persistent, as if they were trying to tell her something just out of reach. She found herself straining to listen, tracing the sounds to the corners of the room where shadows pooled unnaturally. The whispers were fragmented, syllables that never quite formed words, yet somehow they stirred a deep, inexplicable dread inside her chest. Days passed, and the whispers followed her everywhere, soft breaths behind her in empty hallways, voices tangled in the static of the old radio, faint echoes just beyond the edge of hearing. Eliza's friends noticed her growing unease, but she brushed off their concern, afraid to admit how the darkness was invading her mind. She began to avoid the corners of her apartment, turning on every light, yet the shadows seemed to deepen whenever she wasn't looking directly at them. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the whispers crescendoed into a chilling chorus that filled the room. Eliza sat frozen, heart pounding as the voices seemed to swirl around her, close enough to brush her skin. She reached for the old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, hoping for some grounding reflection, only to see the shadows flicker behind her, darker and more defined than ever before. She spun around, but the room was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to her like a second skin. Desperation led Eliza to dig into the apartment's history. She discovered rumors of a tenant who vanished mysteriously decades ago, leaving behind whispers of madness and isolation. The more she learned, the more the whispers seemed to grow louder, as if the past itself was reaching out through the shadows. Her reality blurred were the voices, a haunting remnant of that lost soul, or a reflection of her own unraveling mind. The apartment no longer felt like a home, but a cage of creeping darkness. One night, the whispers stopped. Silence fell so thick it pressed against her ears, heavier than any noise. Eliza waited, breath caught, wondering if the calm was a mercy or a prelude to something worse. Then, just as she relaxed, a single, clear word slipped from the shadows, her name. The room plunged into darkness, and Eliza realized that some whispers never truly fade. They only wait for you to listen.